On the morning of October 25, 1944, off the coast of Samar, Vice Admiral Takio Kurita stood on the bridge of the battleship Yamato and witnessed something his intelligence reports said should not exist. Through the smoke and chaos of battle, American aircraft carriers appeared, and not the famous big carriers Japan had studied for years, but new ones, ships that hadn't even existed 6 months earlier. Kurita and the Imperial Japanese Navy prided themselves on precise naval intelligence. They believed they knew every American carrier by name, shipyard, and deployment pattern. Yet here, in front of them, were carriers appearing out of nowhere, launching wave after wave of attacks. The battle that day would be remembered as the Battle of Samar, where small American escort carriers and destroyers somehow forced back one of the strongest surface fleets Japan ever assembled. But for Kurita and the Japanese High Command, something far more terrifying was unfolding. They were realizing that the United States could build warships faster than Japan could sink them. This was not a failure of bravery, strategy, or technology. Japan had begun the war believing its superior pilots, torpedoes, and night fighting skills would compensate for America's larger economy. They were wrong, because while Japan had spent decades building a navy of elite ships and elite crews, the United States turned its factories into war machines. American shipyards began producing the Essex-Class aircraft carriers, a huge, fast, powerful carriers one after another, like products on an assembly line. Not in years, not even in many months. One new carrier roughly every 6 weeks. By late 1944, the U.S. Navy had so many carriers that Japan could not count them, let alone challenge them. For the Japanese admirals, the realization was devastating. No matter how brave Japan's sailors were a broken bar, no matter how skillfully they fought a broken bar, they were in a war against an entire industrial nation that could replace every loss easily, while Japan could not replace anything. As the Japanese fleet pushed through the waves that morning, Kurita's officers tried to make sense of what they were seeing. Maps were opened, records checked, intelligence logs reread, but no matter where they looked, there was no explanation. How do you fight an enemy who can replace a warship faster than you can report its destruction? Kurita watched the American escort carriers, small, slow, lightly armored ships, launch aircraft again and again. Their decks shook under the force of takeoff, each plane rising into the sky like a promise of death. And Japan's greatest battleships, the Yamato, the Nagato, the heavy cruisers, could only respond with big guns and old doctrine. Massive shells arced across the sky, a broken bar, but they were firing at ghosts of fast-moving planes they couldn't hit. Meanwhile, the American destroyers, ships much smaller and weaker than Yamato, charged straight at the Japanese line in what looked like a suicide attack. But it wasn't suicide. It was courage born from industrial confidence. Those destroyer captains knew something the Japanese did not. Greater than even if they died today, America would build 3 more ships tomorrow. Torpedoes streaked across the waves. Shells struck water with towering white plumes. Smoke swallowed the horizon. The sea roared with fire. Yet the most powerful navy Japan had ever sent into battle hesitated, because they were not fighting ships. They were fighting a factory nation. Kurita felt it in his bones. The Japanese Navy had always believed wars were won by fighter skill, courage, and discipline. But this war, this terrible modern war, was being decided by assembly lines, oil refineries, and steel mills thousands of miles away. That was the real battlefield. Back in America, shipyard workers who would never see the ocean hammered steel plates into carrier hulls. Factories that once built cars now built aircraft engines by the thousands. Women who had never touched machinery before now carried the war on their shoulders. And every 6 weeks, a broken bar, another carrier slid into the sea. Japan had believed it could break America's spirit. Instead, it awakened something far more relentless. Under the pale afternoon sun, the sea looked calm, a broken bar too calm. The Japanese officers on the bridge tried to convince themselves that what they had seen earlier was just one carrier group passing through. Maybe a rotation, maybe a deception. But deep inside, something heavier had settled, an unease that no one dared to voice. Then, 6 weeks later, broken bar, it happened again. A lookout shouted from the mast, voice trembling as though the words themselves were too unreal to speak. Another only a broken bar carrier on the horizon. Binoculars were raised. Eyes widened. No one breathed. It wasn't the same ship. This was a new one. Fresh paint. Different number. A vessel that looked like it had just rolled out of a factory. Clean decks. Bright signal flags. Aircraft arranged like pieces on a chessboard. One admiral stepped back, his hand tightening around the railing. How broken bar? How many do they have? No one answered. The carriers kept appearing. Every second month, every time the Japanese fleet tried to regain rhythm, another one would materialize like a ghost from the Fogo Massif, confident, unstoppable. It was as if America was pulling warships out of thin air. Rumors began spreading among officers, whispered in corridors, exchanged over maps late at night. Some say America builds carriers like we build fishing boats. Number, like we build bicycles. No, a broken bar faster. The silence that followed was louder than any wave crashing against the hull. Meanwhile, out on this flight deck of those American carriers, pilots laughed. Mechanics worked in rhythm. Engines roared with the sound of industry. These ships were not symbols. They were answers. A response to Pearl Harbor. A response to surrender of old strategies. A statement. We can replace what you destroy. You cannot replace what we destroy. And as each new Essex-Class carrier arrived, the balance of the Pacific shifted not dramatically, not with explosions but steadily, like the tide. Inevitable, unstoppable. Back on the Japanese flagship, another admiral finally spoke. His voice did not carry anger, a broken bar, only realization. We are not fighting their navy, he said quietly. We are fighting their factories. Those words hit every man present like a blow to the chest, because in that moment they understood. War was no longer decided by bravery, or honor, or ancient strategy. It was decided by who could build faster, who could replace losses without slowing down, who could turn steel into fleets at the speed of war. Japan had warriors, America had production, and in the vast silence of the Pacific, the admirals of the empire felt something they had never allowed themselves to feel before. The command room was quiet. Only the hum of engines and distant echo of boots on steel. A junior officer hesitated before speaking, his voice barely above a whisper. Officer, sir, a broken bar. The reports from our shipyards, a broken bar. They say new carriers will take 2 years to complete. The admiral didn't look up from the map. His fingers were still, resting on the blue surface of the Pacific. Admiral, 2 years, a broken bar. He exhaled slowly. They are building them in 6 weeks. A silence fell like a curtain. Another officer, older, tried to force optimism into his tone. Senior officer, but our pilots are more experienced. Our men have fought since the beginning. The admiral interrupted, a calm, but sharp. Admiral, experience does not matter when the battlefield changes. The room stiffened. Officer, sir, a broken bar. Then what does matter? The admiral finally looked up. His eyes were heavy. Not defeated but awakened. Admiral, factories, steel, oil, the ability to build again, and again, and again. A young lieutenant clenched his fist, refusing to accept it. Lieutenant, then we must strike harder. We must destroy the next carriers before they launch. The admiral shook his head. Admiral, and what then? Another one will come, and another, until the sea is full. A shadow passed across the room. The weight of truth, undeniable. The lieutenant's voice broke. Lieutenant, then a broken bar we cannot win. The admiral stepped forward and placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Not as a superior officer, a broken bar, but as someone who understood the pain of realization. Admiral, no war is unwinnable, but some wars, a broken bar, are unwinnable in the old way. The sound of distant aircraft engines grew louder outside, echoing like a reminder. Senior officer, then what do we do now, sir? The admiral looked out toward the sea, a horizon that once promised empire, now promising consequences. Admiral, soft, we learn how to fight a war we have already lost. Silence. Thunder of aircraft overhead. Fear no longer whispered, it screamed. The day the horizon turned black, no alarms were needed. It began as a thin line across the water, just a shadow. But shadows in war are never empty. The Japanese sailors watched as that thin line grew while broken bar and grew while broken bar and kept growing, stretching from one end of the sea to the other like the edge of a new world pushing forward. A lookout's voice cracked as he shouted, multiple carriers a broken bar, no multiple task force S a broken bar, zero broken bar, I can't count them. No one spoke. The sky filled first, not with clouds but with wings, dozens, hundreds, a storm of aircraft living and moving as one, like the sky itself had awakened. Engines thundered, the sea trembled. The admirals stood on the bridge in silence. They did not bark orders, they did not scramble, they simply watched. Because there comes a moment in every war when a soldier knows the outcome long before the final shot is fired. It wasn't just the number of ships, it was the newness of aim, of fresh hulls, shining steel, crews with confidence, decks that looked untouched by war. The Japanese flagship's captain whispered, almost to himself, "Captain, this is not a fleet, a broken bar." His voice broke. "Captain, a broken bar, this is an ocean made of steel." The admiral stepped forward, eyes never leaving the horizon. He did not flinch, he did not show fear, but his voice carried the weight of every lost ship, every lost pilot, every sacrifice that had led to this moment. "Admiral, we thought we were fighting a nation. We were wrong." He closed his eyes. "Admiral, we were fighting an industry." The first wave of American aircraft screamed downward, engines howling like judgment. The admiral gave his final order, steady, clear, and without regret. "Admiral, all hands to stations, a broken bar." We faced the storm with dignity. No one panicked, no one ran. They stood their positions of warriors at the edge of history, watching the tide turn. The ocean lit up with fire, the sky shook with thunder, the world changed in seconds, and in those moments of brief, blinding, unforgettably, Japan's admirals understood the truth that history would later carve into stone. Power is not only won on the battlefield, it is forged in factories, fueled by resources, and multiplied by time. The sea swallowed the flames, the echoes drifted away, and the Pacific was no longer